Why does your dead daughter's name say Naomi underneath it? The little black girl's voice was soft under the rain, but the question cut through the marble driveway hard enough to stop everyone moving. Nathaniel Whitmore froze with the cashmere coat still hanging from one hand. The silver bracelet on the girl's wrist glimmered under the mansion lights, wet with rainwater, and for one impossible second, he forgot to breathe. "Sir, she probably scratched that herself," the head of security said quickly, already stepping forward. But the girl pulled her hand back against her chest and whispered, "No, somebody tried to scratch it out." Nathaniel lowered himself slowly despite the rain soaking through the knees of his tailored pants. He turned the bracelet carefully between his fingers. Clara. The name of his daughter was still there, carved crookedly by a child's hand 12 years earlier. But beneath it, almost invisible under fresh silver damage, another name remained buried in the metal. Naomi. Behind him, Eleanor Whitmore stopped at the top of the mansion steps so suddenly that red wine splashed over the rim of her crystal glass and onto her pale silk sleeve. 3 hours earlier, the Whitmore mansion had smelled like polished cedar, expensive perfume, and the white lilies Eleanor insisted on placing in every room during October. Nathaniel noticed the flowers the moment he stepped into his study because Clara had hated lilies, said they smelled like funerals. He loosened his tie while scanning the stack of contracts waiting beside his laptop. Halfway down the pile, one paper had a faint streak of dried glue near the signature line, like someone had peeled apart 2 pages too quickly. Nathaniel touched it absent-mindedly. "You're still working?" Eleanor asked from the doorway, smiling softly enough that most people would have missed how quickly she closed the study door behind her. She crossed the room in a cream-colored dress, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "The board can survive one evening without you." Nathaniel barely smiled. "The board isn't the problem." Eleanor handed him a glass. "Then what is?" He looked toward the dark window overlooking the front gate. "Did we replace the security camera near the west driveway?" Eleanor's expression did not change immediately. That was the strange part. It changed half a second too late. "I thought they repaired it yesterday," she said lightly. Nathaniel nodded once, but his eyes drifted back toward the contract. The glue streak bothered him more than it should have, like something had been attached there and removed in a hurry. Before he could ask another question, Eleanor's phone lit up face down on the desk between them. She flipped it over too fast. Still, Nathaniel caught part of the message reflected briefly across the black glass surface. "She doesn't know about the bracelet." Eleanor tucked the phone into her pocket almost immediately. "Spam messages," she said with a small laugh. Nathaniel studied her for a second longer than usual. Then the front gate intercom buzzed downstairs. One of the guards spoke through the house speaker. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a child outside asking for shelter from the rain." Eleanor answered too quickly. "Tell her to leave." The guard hesitated. "Sir." Nathaniel set down his wine untouched. "I'll handle it." The rain had turned cold by the time he stepped outside. Water ran in silver streams along the black iron gates. The little girl standing there could not have been older than 9. Her hoodie was soaked through. Cheap sneakers. Thin fingers curled tightly around the sleeve of a plastic grocery bag. But she was standing straight, not begging, not crying, just watching the mansion carefully, like she was trying to recognize something. "You shouldn't be out here tonight," Nathaniel said. "Where are your parents?" The girl looked at him for a long moment before answering. "My mama died in March." Her voice stayed calm. "And my little brother gets cold when it rains." Nathaniel glanced toward the guard. "Get them blankets from the guest house." But before the guard moved, the girl shifted the grocery bag against her chest, and the sleeve of her hoodie slipped back just enough for the bracelet to appear beneath the rainwater. Nathaniel's entire body went still, because tied beside the bracelet with fraying blue thread was an old hospital tag. And across the faded plastic, barely visible under water damage, were the words, "Baby Girl Whitmore." The rain kept sliding down the faded plastic tag while Nathaniel Whitmore stared at the words "Baby Girl Whitmore," as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something harmless if he waited long enough. The little girl noticed the way his eyes fixed on the tag and quietly pulled the sleeve of her hoodie back down over it. Not hiding it, protecting it. Sir, the head of security said carefully, lowering his umbrella against the wind. Kids steal hospital bands all the time. Could have come from a thrift store donation. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He was still looking at the bracelet. Clara, Naomi. 2 names carved into the same piece of silver. One scratched deep and childish. The other thinner. Hidden underneath like somebody had tried to erase it without leaving marks. Behind him, Eleanor descended the mansion steps with measured calm, though her heels struck the wet marble slightly too fast. This weather is awful for children, she said softly, stopping beneath the awning. Sweetheart, do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? The girl nodded once. Not really. Eleanor's smile held perfectly in place. Then we should call a shelter nearby. Nathaniel finally looked up. She said her mother died. Many children say things when they're scared, Eleanor replied gently. Too gently. Naomi watched her in silence for a second before speaking. My mama told the truth even when it got her in trouble. The wind shifted. Somewhere deeper inside the property, a loose gate chain clinked against metal. Eleanor folded her arms against the cold. What was your mother's name? Naomi hesitated. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. Not the hesitation of someone inventing a lie. The hesitation of a child deciding whether a name was safe to give away. Grace, she said quietly. Grace Carter. Nathaniel felt something tighten low in his chest. He kept his expression still, but Eleanor's fingers moved instinctively toward the stem of her wine glass again. Grace Carter. 12 years ago, Grace had worked inside this very house for less than 11 months before, disappearing without warning. Most of the staff assumed she quit after Clara's accident. Nathaniel remembered something else. Grace never quit anything without leaving a note. Sir? The security guard asked carefully. Should I make the call? Nathaniel's eyes remained on Naomi. Rainwater dripped steadily from the ends of her braids onto the driveway stone. Cheap grocery store sneakers. A plastic bag with one broken handle. She could not have weighed more than 60 pounds. But she was standing straighter than most adults standing in front of him. Bring towels from the guest house, Nathaniel said at last. Eleanor turned toward him too quickly. Nathaniel. He looked at her. She's freezing. That's not what concerns me. The sentence came out softer than anger. That made it worse. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the bracelet. My mama said people in big houses smile when they're scared. Eleanor laughed lightly, but the sound stopped too abruptly at the end. That's an odd thing for a child to say. Nathaniel finally noticed another detail then. Naomi's grocery bag was partially open near the top. Inside, beneath a folded sweatshirt, sat an old flip phone connected to a portable charger with cracked tape around the wire. The charging screen blinked weakly. One new voicemail. Naomi immediately pushed the bag closed when she realized he had seen it. Does that phone belong to your mother? Nathaniel asked. Naomi shook her head once. No, sir. Then whose is it? She swallowed before answering. A lady told my mama to keep it hidden if anything ever happened. Eleanor stepped forward immediately. Nathaniel, this is getting absurd. She's a frightened child carrying random junk. But Nathaniel's attention had already drifted elsewhere. Past Naomi. Past the rain. Toward the west security camera mounted near the gate. The tiny red recording light was off again. He stared at it for 2 long seconds. Then very quietly, without taking his eyes off the dark camera, he asked the head of security, when exactly did that feed stop working tonight? The guard frowned slightly. Around 8:40, sir. Nathaniel nodded once. Because Clara's old hospital bracelet, according to the coroner's report he had memorized 12 years ago, listed her official time of death as 8:42 p.m. The rain had started to thin into a cold mist by the time Nathaniel Whitmore finally looked away from the dark security camera. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the mansion roof. Somewhere farther down the driveway, thunder rolled softly across the hills. Naomi was the first one to move. She tightened her fingers around the plastic grocery bag and quietly stepped backward when one of the guards reached toward it. "Don't touch it," she said. The guard stopped, more surprised by her tone than the words themselves. She was small, soaked, shivering hard enough for her shoulders to tremble beneath the thin hoodie. But her eyes stayed fixed on the bag like it contained something alive. Eleanor folded her arms tighter. "Nathaniel, this has gone far enough. She needs social services, not an audience." Nathaniel barely seemed to hear her. His attention remained on Naomi. "What's inside the bag besides the phone?" Naomi hesitated. He noticed that too. Every answer from her came with a calculation first. Not manipulation. Survival. "Stuff my mama kept," she said quietly. Things she said belonged to somebody rich. Eleanor's expression sharpened for less than a second before smoothing over again. "Children repeat strange stories after grief," she said gently. "Especially when adults fill their heads with fantasies." Naomi looked directly at her then. "My mama stopped talking whenever your name came on TV." The sentence landed softly, but Nathaniel saw Eleanor's jaw tighten before she smiled again. "That's enough," Eleanor said. "You're scaring the child now." Nathaniel finally stepped closer to Naomi, lowering his voice slightly. "Can I see what's in the bag?" Naomi looked down at the wet pavement. For a moment, Nathaniel thought she might run. Instead, she crouched carefully and opened the broken grocery bag just enough for him to see inside. A folded sweatshirt, 2 peanut butter cracker packs, a water-stained envelope tied shut with blue yarn, and beneath them, the old flip phone blinking weakly against the charger battery. One. Voicemail still unread. Nathaniel's eyes stopped on the envelope. "What's that?" Naomi touched it immediately before answering. "Mama said not to open it unless somebody lies about Clara." Eleanor spoke too quickly. "This is insane." Nathaniel glanced toward her. "You knew Grace Carter." "Barely." "You remember her?" Eleanor gave a tiny shrug. "We employed dozens of people over the years." But Nathaniel remembered something Eleanor clearly did not. Grace had worked almost exclusively upstairs, near Clara, near the nursery. Eleanor was about to say something else when the flip phone suddenly vibrated inside the bag. The sharp, buzzing sound cut through the rain like an alarm. Naomi flinched hard enough to nearly drop it. The screen lit up. Unknown caller. Eleanor's face lost color again. "Don't answer that," she said immediately. Too immediately. Nathaniel noticed Naomi notice it too. The little girl slowly looked from Eleanor to the phone, then back to Nathaniel. "My mama said if this number ever called again, I was supposed to listen first before trusting anybody." Nathaniel held out his hand. "Put it on speaker." Naomi swallowed but obeyed. The voicemail autoplayed before the call connected. Static crackled through the tiny speaker first. Then a woman's frightened voice filled the rainy driveway. "Grace, if you kept the bracelet, don't bring the child back there. Eleanor will never let that baby stay in the house once Nathaniel sees her." The message cut off abruptly into dead air. Nobody moved. Even the guards looked uncertain now. Eleanor recovered first. "That could be anybody," she said quietly. "An edited recording. AI can fake voices now." But Nathaniel was no longer looking at her. He was staring at the date stamp glowing faintly on the flip phone screen beneath the voicemail. October 14th. 12 years ago. The exact night Clara Whitmore officially died. Then Naomi said something so softly Nathaniel almost missed it. "That's not the strange part." She pointed toward the timestamp again with a trembling finger. The voicemail came in at 9:17 p.m. Nathaniel felt the cold settle deeper into his chest. Because according to Clara's hospital records, Eleanor had signed the final death paperwork at 8:53. The rain had nearly stopped, but the cold lingered in the stone driveway as if the night itself was listening. Nathaniel Whitmore kept staring at the glowing timestamp on the flip phone while water dripped slowly from the edge of his coat sleeve. 9:17 p.m., 24 minutes after Eleanor officially signed the death paperwork. Nobody spoke first. Naomi stood silently beside the gate, both hands wrapped around the grocery bag now, shoulders small beneath the soaked hoodie. Eleanor finally stepped forward with the controlled calm of someone used to rooms obeying her voice. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "this is exactly how frightened children get exploited. Somebody fed her old stories and fake recordings." "The voicemail used your name," Nathaniel replied without looking up. "People know my name. Not from 12 years ago." Eleanor's smile tightened almost invisibly. "You are exhausted. You've been under pressure for months." One of the attorneys from the House staff had arrived during the rain, carrying a leather umbrella and a tablet pressed against his chest. Richard Valley. Gray suit, silver tie. The kind of man who sounded reasonable even when removing people from rooms. He stopped several feet away from Naomi, careful not to appear threatening. "Sir," he said gently, "if this concerns Miss Clara's records, I strongly recommend we move this discussion indoors and contact hospital administration before involving the child further." Naomi lowered her eyes at the word child. Nathaniel noticed her fingers tighten around the grocery bag again. Richard continued calmly. "There are liability issues here. Chain of custody. False identification. Potential manipulation." Naomi spoke before Nathaniel could answer. "I didn't ask to come inside." Richard gave her a polite nod without really looking at her. Of course. That was the first truly cold thing Nathaniel had heard all night. Not rude. Worse, dismissive. Like Naomi was already becoming paperwork instead of a person. Eleanor turned toward Naomi with soft concern practiced over years of charity galas and foundation speeches. "Sweetheart, no one thinks you're lying on purpose." Naomi looked at her. "Then why won't you look at the bracelet?" Silence slipped briefly across the driveway. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the silver bracelet for less than a second before she looked away again. "Because jewelry proves nothing." Naomi slowly pulled the bracelet higher onto her wrist. "My mama said you stopped touching it after Clara got sick." Nathaniel's head lifted sharply. Eleanor laughed softly, but this time the sound cracked at the edges. "Nathaniel, please." Grace Carter was unstable near the end. Everyone knew that. Richard stepped in smoothly before the moment could harden further. "Sir, perhaps we should separate the child from these emotionally charged topics tonight." "Separate?" Naomi repeated quietly. "From what?" Nobody answered her immediately. Nathaniel finally looked at the little girl fully for the first time. Water still clung to the ends of her braids. Her sneakers were splitting near the soles. She looked impossibly small standing beneath the towering white columns of the Whitmore estate. And still, somehow, she was the only person there who had not changed her story once. Richard extended a hand toward the grocery bag. "Miss Carter, if there are documents inside, we can preserve them properly." Naomi stepped back instantly. "No, we're trying to help you. That's what the lady at the hospital told my mama before security came." The sentence hit strangely hard because Naomi said it without anger. Just memory. Eleanor folded her arms tighter. "This is getting dangerous now." Nathaniel glanced toward her. "Dangerous for who?" Eleanor did not answer immediately. Somewhere inside the mansion, a grandfather clock began striking 10. Deep, hollow, slow. Richard carefully changed direction. "Sir, the child should at minimum be evaluated somewhere warm tonight." "She's cold because you all kept talking instead of listening," Naomi said softly. Nathaniel saw Richard almost respond before stopping himself. Another controlled silence settled over the group. Then Naomi did something small that changed the air again. She crouched beside the grocery bag and pulled out the water-stained envelope tied with blue yarn. "My mama told me not to open this unless somebody lies about Clara," she whispered. Eleanor's composure finally slipped. "Don't." The word came out too fast, too sharp. Everyone heard it. Naomi froze with the envelope halfway open in her hands. And that was when Nathaniel noticed something else. In the lower corner of the envelope, beneath the water stains and faded folds, was the embossed gold seal of Whitmore Children's Hospital. The embossed gold seal of Whitmore Children's Hospital seemed to drain the warmth from the entire driveway. Rainwater slid slowly across the envelope in Naomi's hands while nobody moved to speak first. Eleanor recovered before anyone else did. That seal means nothing, she said calmly, though her fingers remained locked too tightly around the stem of her wine glass. Thousands of envelopes passed through that hospital. Naomi looked down at the faded paper. My mama kept this one hidden inside the freezer. Richard Vale stepped closer immediately. Miss Carter, documents damaged by moisture can become fragile. Perhaps let me hold it for you. Naomi pulled it back against her chest so fast the blue yarn tightened around her wrist. No, Richard's polite smile held, but thinner now. You don't understand how important proper handling is. I understand people keep trying to take it. Nathaniel watched the exchange silently. Then he held out one hand toward Naomi. Not demanding. Waiting. You can keep holding it, he said quietly. But let me see the front. Naomi hesitated before slowly turning the envelope toward him. The gold hospital seal sat near the lower corner beneath water stains and freezer damage. Above it, almost faded away completely, was handwriting in blue ink. For Nathaniel only. The sight of his own name in Grace Carter's handwriting hit him harder than he expected, because he remembered where he had last seen those exact looping letters. On a sticky note left beside Clara's hospital bed 2 days before the accident. Clara hates apple juice. Only grape. Nathaniel felt his breathing slow unevenly. Eleanor noticed it immediately. Nathaniel, she said gently. People imitate handwriting all the time now, but he was already reaching toward the blue yarn around the envelope. Naomi stepped back once more. My mama said only open it if somebody lies about Clara. The sentence settled heavily into the cold air between them. Nathaniel lowered his hand. Do you think someone's lying? Naomi looked directly at Eleanor before answering. I think grown-ups change stories when rich people get scared. Eleanor laughed softly again. But this time Nathaniel heard strain underneath it. This child is repeating things she doesn't understand. Then why are you scared of the envelope? Naomi asked. Silence. Deep enough that even the guards looked away. Richard cleared his throat smoothly. Sir, perhaps we should continue this discussion indoors. The child is exhausted. Nathaniel nodded once. Guest kitchen. Eleanor's head turned sharply toward him. You're bringing her inside? She's standing in 40-degree rain holding something from our hospital. Eleanor's jaw tightened slightly. And if this is extortion? Nathaniel's eyes remained on the envelope. Then we'll know soon enough. 10 minutes later, the warmth of the guest kitchen felt strangely unreal after the storm outside. A small television above the refrigerator played muted late-night weather updates no one was watching. Naomi sat carefully at the far end of the long marble island wrapped in a dry gray blanket one of the maids had brought down from storage. She did not eat the soup placed in front of her. She only kept one hand on the envelope the entire time. Nathaniel noticed that too. Richard stood near the espresso machine quietly texting someone with his phone angled away from the room. Eleanor remained near the doorway, composed again now that walls existed between them and the outside world. Open it, she finally said. Nathaniel looked at Naomi first. You decide. Naomi swallowed, then slowly untied the blue yarn. The old paper crackled softly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Water damaged. Bent through the middle. Nathaniel took it carefully with both hands. At first he only saw hospital sheets, medical equipment, a blurred nurse in the background. Then his eyes found Clara lying weak and pale in the hospital bed. Alive. The timestamp in the lower corner read 9:11 p.m. 14 minutes after Eleanor claimed Clara had already died. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the photograph. But that was not what truly stopped his breathing. Wrapped in Clara's arms beneath the hospital blanket was a newborn baby wearing a tiny pink identification band. And on the band, barely visible beneath the blur and scratches, were the words Baby Girl Whitmore. Nathaniel slowly lifted his eyes toward Eleanor. She did not speak. She did not move. But for the first time in 12 years, she looked at the photograph the way guilty people look at evidence they thought had been destroyed. The kitchen remained completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of rainwater sliding down the windows above the sink. Nathaniel Whitmore kept staring at the photograph in his hands, while the muted television over the counter flashed weather warnings no one noticed anymore. Clara alive at 9:11 p.m. A newborn in her arms. Baby girl Whitmore. Eleanor finally stepped forward carefully, as if sudden movement itself might become dangerous. "Nathaniel," she said softly. "You know how damaged old photographs can be. Timestamps glitch. Hospital equipment resets." Nathaniel did not look up. This was printed on thermal film. Eleanor stopped speaking. Richard Vale quietly adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. "Sir, before assumptions are made, we should verify authenticity professionally." Naomi sat very still beneath the gray blanket. Her soup had gone cold untouched beside her. Nathaniel noticed that too. A child standing in a billionaire's kitchen after midnight, cold enough to shiver, yet more concerned with protecting old papers than eating. "Why didn't your mother give this to anyone before she died?" he asked quietly. Naomi lowered her eyes to the table. "Because she said rich people can make papers disappear." Eleanor turned immediately. "That is enough." Naomi flinched slightly at the sharpness in her voice but did not look away this time. "She said somebody already did." The silence afterward felt heavier than shouting. Nathaniel slowly set the photograph down, beside the hospital bracelet. Then, without warning, he stood and walked toward the far end of the kitchen where his private office phone sat mounted beneath a cabinet. Eleanor watched him carefully now. "Who are you calling?" "Someone who still remembers how to keep records." He dialed from memory. 3 rings. Then an older man answered sleepily. "Dr. Levin speaking." Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "I need archived maternity records from Whitmore Children's Hospital. October 14th. 12 years ago." A long pause followed. "Nathaniel?" the old doctor said quietly, suddenly awake now. "Those files were sealed." Nathaniel's eyes lifted slowly toward Eleanor across the kitchen. "I know." Another silence. Then Dr. Levin spoke lower. "You should not request those through the hospital system." Nathaniel's grip tightened around the receiver. "Why not?" The answer came carefully. "Because someone's been checking whether those records still exist." Eleanor looked away first. Nathaniel ended the call without another word. Richard stepped forward immediately in damage control comm. "Sir, if confidential archives are involved, discretion matters now more than ever." Nathaniel looked at him. "Did you know those records were sealed?" Richard hesitated only half a second. "I know sensitive cases were handled privately after Clara's death." Half a second. Small. But Nathaniel noticed it. Naomi noticed it too. The little girl quietly reached into the grocery bag again and pulled out the old flip phone. "There's something else," she whispered. Eleanor's face tightened instantly. "Naomi, you've caused enough confusion tonight." Naomi ignored her. She pressed several buttons carefully, then held the phone toward Nathaniel. Mama kept one number saved. Only one. Nathaniel took the phone slowly. The contact name on the tiny cracked screen read simply, N. Underneath sat dozens of outgoing calls never answered. Some lasted 2 seconds. Some less than 1. But one call stood out immediately. October 16th. 2 days after Clara died. Duration 11 minutes. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "That's impossible." Eleanor folded her arms. "Why?" Nathaniel looked up at her at last. "Because my phone records show I was overseas by then." Naomi spoke softly from the kitchen table. "My mama said the man who answered sounded tired and kept crying." Nathaniel felt the cold move deeper through his chest. He had not cried in front of anyone after Clara's death. Not even Eleanor. Richard quickly stepped in again. "Phone logs can be cloned. Numbers spoofed." But Nathaniel was no longer listening to him. He was staring at the final outgoing call on the flip phone screen. The call made 3 months ago. The same private number Nathaniel still carried today. And beneath it, saved as a voicemail transcript not yet deleted, were 6 words that made his stomach turn cold. "This is not Nathaniel Whitmore speaking." The kitchen felt colder after the voicemail transcript appeared on the tiny cracked screen. "This is not Nathaniel Whitmore speaking." Nobody moved for several seconds. The refrigerator hummed softly behind them while rain tapped against the dark windows over the sink. Naomi sat perfectly still beneath the gray blanket, watching Nathaniel instead of Eleanor now. Nathaniel slowly handed the phone back to her. "Keep it with you," he said quietly. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward him immediately. "Nathaniel, if someone has been impersonating you, then this is criminal manipulation. We should involve authorities now." "Not yet." The calmness in his voice unsettled her more than anger would have. Richard Vale stepped closer to the marble island. "Sir, with respect, if sensitive family material exists on that device, preserving legal custody matters." Nathaniel finally looked at him. Interesting choice of words. Richard paused. "Sir, you said if sensitive material exists." Nathaniel folded his hands slowly in front of him. "Not if it's fake. Not if it's fabricated. Sensitive." Richard's expression stayed composed, but one finger tightened slightly around the edge of his tablet. Tiny. Almost invisible. Naomi noticed it immediately. "That's what the nurse did too," she said softly. Everyone turned toward her. "What nurse?" Nathaniel asked. Naomi pointed gently toward Richard's hand. "The one my mama was scared of. He held papers like that when he lied." Richard gave a polite smile that never reached his eyes. Children connect random memories all the time. Nathaniel did not defend Naomi. That was what made the silence dangerous now. He simply reached for the water-stained photograph again and slid it across the counter toward Eleanor. "Tell me something simple," he said quietly. "Who took this picture?" Eleanor looked at the photograph only briefly before answering. "I don't know. Look closer." "Nathaniel, I buried our daughter." "That's not what I asked." The room went still again. Eleanor inhaled slowly. "Probably a nurse." Nathaniel nodded once. Then he reached into his pocket, removed his phone, and opened the enlarged scan he had quietly taken of the photograph moments earlier while everyone was arguing. He zoomed in on the lower corner near the hospital bed rail. "Then why is your reflection in the glass?" Eleanor's breathing stopped for half a second. Small. But Naomi saw it. Nathaniel turned the screen outward. Reflected faintly in the dark monitor beside Clara's bed stood Eleanor herself holding the camera. Richard spoke quickly this time. "Reflections distort depth." "They do," Nathaniel agreed calmly. "But not jewelry." Eleanor's hand moved instinctively toward her neck. Too late. Nathaniel zoomed closer. The woman in the reflection wore the same emerald necklace Eleanor had inherited from her mother years before Clara died. Naomi looked at the screen carefully. "That's the necklace from the TV room portrait." Eleanor's composure slipped again. "You brought her into the house?" Nathaniel ignored the question. "Interesting thing about this necklace," he said quietly, eyes still on Eleanor. "You told police you never entered Clara's room after 8:30 because you couldn't bear seeing her attached to machines." Richard immediately stepped in. "Trauma affects memory, sir." Nathaniel looked at him now instead of Eleanor. "You seem very eager to answer for my wife tonight." Richard said nothing. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a phone began vibrating repeatedly against a glass tabletop. No one moved to check it. Nathaniel slowly reached for the old flip phone again. "Naomi," he said gently, "when your mother played that voicemail for you, did she ever say who answered using my number?" Naomi nodded once. "She said the man sounded scared somebody was listening." Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Anything else?" Naomi hesitated, then pointed toward Richard's tablet. "She said he kept tapping something while he talked. Like that." Richard had been unconsciously tapping the edge of the tablet with his thumbnail the entire conversation. The tapping stopped instantly. Nobody in the kitchen missed it. Eleanor finally turned toward Richard fully for the first time that night. And in that brief silent exchange between them, Nathaniel realized something colder than betrayal itself. Neither of them was surprised the child remembered details. The tapping stopped. That was the moment the balance inside the kitchen shifted for good. Richard Vale slowly lowered the tablet against his side while Eleanor stood perfectly still near the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the marble counter as though she suddenly needed help remaining upright. Nathaniel Whitmore watched both of them without speaking. The silence became so complete that the faint weather report from the muted television sounded unnaturally loud. Naomi pulled the gray blanket tighter around her shoulders and quietly looked toward the old flip phone again. "There's one thing Mama never let me play," she whispered. Eleanor's voice came too fast. "Naomi, enough." The little girl flinched slightly at her tone but reached into the grocery bag anyway. Beneath the envelope and the hospital bracelet sat a small silver digital recorder wrapped carefully inside a child's pink sock. Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten immediately. Not because of the recorder itself, because he recognized it. Clara had used that exact recorder to save piano lessons when she was 8 years old. The tiny moon sticker near the battery compartment was still there. Naomi held it carefully with both hands. "Mama said if people started lying together, I should play this where everybody can hear." Richard stepped forward at once. "Sir, this is highly inappropriate without legal review." Nathaniel extended his hand toward Naomi without taking his eyes off Richard. "Give it to me." Naomi hesitated only briefly before placing the recorder into his palm. It felt impossibly small there. Eleanor's face had gone completely pale now. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "you are tired, emotional, and being manipulated by old trauma." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pressed play. Static crackled softly through the kitchen first. A hospital monitor beeped somewhere in the background. Then Clara's weak teenage voice filled the room. "Mom!" Nathaniel stopped breathing. He had not heard his daughter's voice in 12 years. The next sound was Eleanor answering immediately, calm and soothing. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Clara sounded exhausted. "Where's the baby?" Nobody in the kitchen moved. Nathaniel's fingers tightened slowly around the recorder. Eleanor closed her eyes. Clara spoke again, weaker this time. "I heard her crying." Then another voice entered the recording. "Richard Vale. Younger. Nervous. Mrs. Whitmore, the paperwork must be signed before midnight." Nathaniel's head turned slowly toward him. Richard said nothing. On the recorder, Eleanor lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "Nathaniel cannot know about this child." Naomi stared at the marble counter while the recording continued. Clara started crying softly in the background. "Please don't take her away." Nathaniel's entire body went rigid. The kitchen suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. Eleanor stepped forward once. "Nathaniel, listen to me." But the recording kept playing. Grace Carter's frightened voice entered next. "Mrs. Whitmore, she just gave birth. She needs her baby." Then Eleanor again. "Cold now. Controlled. If that child stays connected to this family, everything collapses." Richard's voice followed quietly. "The transfer papers are ready." Nathaniel lowered the recorder very slowly. He looked at Eleanor as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Not angry. Worse. Empty. "You told me Clara died alone," he said softly. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I was trying to save this family. By stealing my granddaughter?" The words landed like a gunshot despite how quietly he said them. Naomi looked down. Immediately after hearing the word granddaughter, gripping the hospital bracelet tightly around her wrist, Richard stepped forward again, desperate now to regain control. "Sir, emotions are escalating. We should contain this privately before assumptions become public." Nathaniel turned toward him with terrifying calm. "You forged my voice." Richard opened his mouth but stopped, because Naomi suddenly pointed toward the recorder. "Wait." Everyone looked at her. "Go back 10 seconds. Nathaniel rewound the audio slightly. Static crackled again. Then, underneath Clara crying, another sound became audible for the first time. A hospital intercom voice announcing the exact room number. "Maternity wing. Room 511. Nathaniel's face lost all color. Clara had never been admitted to maternity care according to the official records. The entire room understood it at once. This had never been a cover-up after Clara died. The cover-up had started before anyone told Nathaniel she was dead. Nathaniel carefully placed the recorder beside the bracelet on the marble counter. Then he looked at Richard without blinking and spoke in the calmest voice Naomi had heard all night. "Call my attorney." No one touched the recorder after Nathaniel Whitmore said the words. "Call my attorney." The kitchen remained silent except for the rain tapping softly against the dark windows and the low electrical hum of the refrigerator light above the marble counter. Richard Vale was the first to move. Slowly, carefully, like a man realizing the floor beneath him was no longer solid. "Nathaniel," he began quietly, "before irreversible accusations are made publicly, you altered hospital records under my name." Nathaniel's voice stayed calm enough to make everyone else sound louder by comparison. Richard stopped speaking. Eleanor looked exhausted suddenly. Not elegant, not composed, just tired in the way people look when a lie finally becomes heavier than carrying it. "I thought I was protecting Clara," she whispered. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "No. You were protecting yourself." 3 weeks later, Whitmore Children's Hospital held an emergency board meeting behind closed doors while reporters crowded outside beneath cold November rain. Richard Vale resigned before the investigation formally began. 2 senior administrators from the old maternity division were suspended pending federal review for altered birth records and falsified discharge paperwork. Eleanor stepped down from the Whitmore Foundation that same week after the recorder, the hospital photograph, and the archived maternity logs were authenticated independently by investigators. The official statement called it historic procedural misconduct, but everyone inside the city understood what it really meant. A dying girl had begged not to lose her baby, and powerful people decided money mattered more than the child she left behind. Nathaniel did not attend the press conference. Instead, he sat inside a quiet legal office downtown while Naomi swung her legs nervously beneath a leather chair too large for her small frame. The old bracelet rested on the table between them beside corrected birth documents. Naomi Clara Whitmore Carter. Nathaniel stared at the papers longer than he had stared at billion-dollar contracts in his entire career. Because this was the first thing connected to Clara he had touched in 12 years that did not feel buried. Naomi watched him carefully. "Are they going to make me change my name?" she asked softly. Nathaniel looked up immediately. "Only if you want to." She nodded once, relieved.
Mama Liket Carter.
Nathaniel swallowed hard before answering. "Then Carter stays." Naomi smiled a little for the first time since arriving at the mansion. Small, quick, gone almost immediately, but real. Outside the office window, Manhattan traffic crawled through gray afternoon rain, while attorneys moved quietly through hallways carrying folders stamped confidential. Nathaniel had already established a trust for Naomi and her younger brother, restored Grace Carter's employment record at the hospital, and funded an independent legal defense clinic for families harmed by falsified medical documentation. But none of it felt enough. Not after understanding how many chances he had missed to ask harder questions years ago. "Your mother saved you," he said quietly. Naomi looked down at the bracelet on the table. "She said rich people can erase papers," she whispered. "But they can't erase people forever." Nathaniel could not answer for several seconds. Later that night, back at the mansion, the house felt different. Quieter. Not empty anymore. The portrait of Clara in the west hallway had been cleaned for the first time in years. Naomi stood in front of it wearing a borrowed sweater that hung too large around her shoulders, while one of the housekeepers heated tomato soup in the kitchen downstairs. Nathaniel stopped beside her. "She had your eyes," he said softly. Naomi shook her head. "No," he looked at her. Naomi touched the silver bracelet gently. "I got hers." Nathaniel felt something inside him break open then. Not loudly, just enough to finally let grief breathe again. A few minutes later, he walked Naomi to the guest room prepared for her and her brother. Fresh blankets, warm lamps, a glass of milk waiting untouched on the nightstand. Naomi paused before entering. "Mr. Whitmore? You can call me Nathaniel if you want." She thought about that seriously. Then she asked the question that finally made him lower his head and close his eyes for a moment. "If Mama told the truth the whole time," she whispered, "why did nobody important listen until now?" Nathaniel looked at the old bracelet around her wrist, at the child who had carried the truth through rain, fear, and rooms full of powerful adults who tried to make her smaller. Then he answered honestly, "Because people like me listened too late." And for the first time since Clara died, the truth inside that house mattered more than the name written on the front gate.